welcome to the CEC Gurukul Live lecture series on Introduction to Indian Philosophy, and today I am going to speak about philosophy in the Upanishads. It is believed that out of the vast Vedic literature, only a portion is now available, as the majority of it was destroyed either with the advent of Buddhism or with the perishing of the families who were the caretakers of those scriptures. It is therefore difficult to ascertain anything about the number of Upanishads. However, the Muktika Upanishad gives a list of about 108 Upanishads. To decide which of these 108 Upanishads are the most significant, we can resort to Shankaracharya, who has commented only on 11 Upanishads. These important principal Upanishads are Isha Upanishad, Kena Upanishad, Katha Upanishad, Prashna Upanishad, Mandukya Upanishad, Mundaka Upanishad, Taittiriya Upanishad, Aitareya Upanishad, Chandogya Upanishad, and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It is interesting to note that each Upanishad discusses the same subject, but only with a slight variation, and this will be evident when we discuss some principal Upanishads in detail in the course of this lecture. But before that, let us first understand the meaning of the term Upanishad. Now, the word Upanishad is made up of three parts. The prefixes Upa and Ni, joined to the verbal root Sad. The root Sad is used in three different senses. The first sense is to loosen, the second is to attain, and third is to destroy. The prefix Upa means near, and the other prefix Ni means perfectly. Thus, the word Upanishad means knowledge which loosens totally the bondage of the world, or the knowledge which enables the seeker to attain the self, or the knowledge which destroys ignorance. But the literal meaning of the word Upanishad is sitting down near the teacher or guru for the purpose of direct guidance on the secret doctrines. Shankaracharya describes the word Upanishad as those seekers after liberation who, being averse to the things of the senses, whether here or hereafter, take up this knowledge and practice it with steadfast devotion, have their ignorance, etc., which are the seeds of their transmigration, shattered or destroyed, or it makes these aspirants attain the supreme Brahman. Generally, perception and inference are regarded as the main sources of knowledge. Perception gives us knowledge of all that comes in the domain of our sense organs. Inference, which of course is based on perception, is used to know things which cannot be perceived but can be reached or understood by the mind. But there is something which cannot be known either by perception or by inference, and that is where Upanishads come to guide us. And here I am referring to questions like: what is the ultimate reality? What is the relation of the individual and the world? Is there a soul? What happens after one dies? Is there any heaven? Is there life after death? What is the final goal of a man? And the list of questions goes on. Imagine, how can perception and inference help us in finding answers to these questions when they are so limited in their scope? And that is why we have Upanishads, which give us the final word or answers to all these questions. I say that the Upanishads give us the final word because the source of Upanishads is not any human, and therefore it is believed that they are beyond the human shortcomings of error, doubt, and hypothetical claims. In the last lecture, I said that the philosophy of the Vedas emerges in the Upanishads, which are the last portion of the Vedas. To understand this transition from ritualism to philosophical thinking, I'll take a few examples. Remember the mantra portion of the Vedas, which is based on the performance of sacrifices? Now, these sacrifices generally included oblations of ghee or wheat or rice or barley into the fire. But sometimes they even refer to killing of animals like horses or hens. So, if anyone desired heaven, performed Jyotishtoma sacrifice, and if one wanted to defeat one's enemy, performed the Shena sacrifice. So, we see the actual doing of the sacrifices in the mantra period. Now, how the Upanishads changed the whole scenario and brought philosophy into it? Let us understand that. But let me tell you, the change here does not mean that the Upanishads had put a full stop to all these ritualistic performances. What the Upanishads did was that they replaced these offerings in the sacrifices with better and profound forms of them. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad suggests to concentrate not on the ordinary horse, but on the one whose head is the dawn, whose eye is the sun, whose back is heaven, and so on. The Chandogya Upanishad also says that instead of using the ordinary fire in the sacrifices, think of the one in heaven, which has the sun as its fuel, the solar rays as its smoke, the moon as its cinder, and so on. Basically, the Upanishads intend to divert the aspirant's mind from the external world to his internal world, and to rid him of his dependence on the objects of the world. All the Upanishads convey the following. Number 1, there is unity in diversity. Number 2, the Atman is the knowing subject within us. Number 3, the ultimate reality is Brahman, but the Brahman is the same as Atman. And number 4, knowledge of this identity between Brahman and Atman leads to liberation or moksha. Now, these messages in the form of 4 sentences are conveyed in the Upanishads in as many words as possible and in as many ways as possible. There are stories, narratives, analogies, illustrations which explain the truth about the ultimate reality. The truths like the Atman is below, above, to the west, east, south, and north. The Atman is indeed the whole world. And this truth implies internalization of the sacrifices. One has to realize that the world of senses, mind, intellect, feelings constituting the individuality of a person is a product of ignorance or avidya. But the actual self, that is Atman, is above all this. Now, it's time to understand the ultimate reality or Brahman. The Mundaka Upanishad asks the question, what is that by knowing which everything in this universe is known? And the answer to the question comes in the conception of Brahman. The word Brahman comes from the root brih, which means to grow or to evolve. So, Brahman is that which grows or evolves itself as the world. Interestingly, the Chandogya Upanishad describes Brahman as Tajjalan. The word Tajjalan is made up of 4 parts: Tat, Ja, La, and An. Tat means that, Ja means from which the world arises, La means into which it returns, and An means by which it is supported. Now, the Upanishads explain evolution in the following way. From Brahman, arises ether or akash. From ether arises air or vayu. From air arises fire or agni. From fire arises water or jala. And from water, earth, that is Prithvi. In the Upanishads, Brahman is described in two ways. One is Saprapancha or Saguna, that is full of good qualities, and the second is Nishprapancha or Nirguna, that is qualityless and indescribable. These distinctions later gave rise to the concept of lower Brahman and higher Brahman. The lower Brahman was identified with Ishvara or God, and the higher Brahman was identified as the Absolute. Matter, self, and God were considered as the manifestations of the Absolute. Now, I will take up some episodes and narratives from a few Upanishads to corroborate what I just said. It would not be possible to discuss all the major 11 Upanishads, so I plan to pick up Chandogya Upanishad, Mandukya Upanishad, Katha Upanishad, and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Now, we are in the constant process of transmigration. We are born, we have experiences, pleasant, unpleasant, and then we die. And this process goes on. The fact is, we are bound by the laws of nature. These laws limit us. Our whole life depends on these laws, and we have to deal with our finitude and restricted physicality, as we cannot think of things we cannot perceive. We cannot go beyond the limits of space and time. We have no control over anything. Take the law of gravitation as an example. We are bound by it. So, we are limited in all aspects. And therefore, we have no choice but to follow the diktats of the laws of nature. So, we are born, we die, and while we are alive, we have our share of experiences. But the truth is, we are trapped in our shell of ignorance. Let us start with the Chandogya Upanishad, for it prescribes a remedy to get out of these clutches of ignorance. But is it that simple? Will this prescription eradicate ignorance? To the first question, the answer is no. It is not simple. And to the second question, the answer is yes. The prescription will definitely eradicate ignorance only if one understands the significance of Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana. Now, Shravana means hearing from the Guru or the teacher. Manana means reflecting upon what is said by the Guru, and Nididhyasana means internalizing the truth that one reflects upon. Unless one reaches the stage of Nididhyasana, that is, understanding and becoming one with the knowledge, no amount of Upanishadic teachings can help. Our common knowledge tells us that our actions are responsible for our births and deaths and the various pleasant and unpleasant experiences that we have. But is this knowledge enough to liberate us? No. And that is why the Chandogya Upanishad recommends 5 meditational techniques called Panchagni Vidya, or the knowledge of 5 fires. Fire here has a symbolic reference of a sacrifice performed through meditation. And this exalted meditation enables the performer to live in the world and yet not be bound by the laws of the world, and after death ascend to the higher regions of liberation. Thus, the Upanishads praise the immensity and glory of knowledge, which ultimately leads one to liberation or moksha. If you remember, I left my last lecture with a story from the Chandogya Upanishad, a story of a boy, Shvetaketu, who, after coming back from the hermitage of his guru, is full of pride and arrogance. But when his father Uddalaka asks him whether he got the great instructions from his guru, Shvetaketu realized the hollowness of his arrogant behavior and requested his father to educate him about what he called the great instructions. Then the father teaches him the distinction between Aparavidya and Paravidya. Vedic knowledge is Aparavidya and is about performing sacrifices and rituals to please gods and goddesses. But Upanishadic knowledge is Paravidya and is about knowing, seeing and becoming one with the supreme reality, that is Brahman. Uddalaka says, just as the substratum of all things made of earth, for example pitcher, water pot, etc., is earth, the difference is only with regard to the name and form, and just as the substratum of things made of gold, such as bangle, ring, and armlet, is gold, the difference is only in name and form, and the substratum of things made of iron, such as nails, knife, etc., is iron, the difference only is the name and form of the objects. Similarly, the substratum or the basis of all that exists in the universe is Brahman. The sun, the moon, the stars, mountains and rivers have appeared out of the one invisible reality. If the various objects are stripped of their names and forms, what remains will be the ultimate reality. And the supreme truth consists in knowing that by which everything is known. Another interesting story about the knowledge of Brahman that comes from the Chandogya Upanishad goes like this. Once, Prajapati made an announcement that he was ready to reveal the knowledge of self or Brahman, and that this knowledge will not only make one attain all worlds, but all his desires will also be fulfilled. Hearing this announcement, both the gods and the demons decided to send Indra and Virochana respectively to Prajapati to know the self, so that their wishes could be fulfilled. So, they both reached Prajapati's hermitage with faggots in hands to receive his instructions. Their teacher Prajapati asked them to undergo the required austerities for 32 years so that they become eligible to receive the teaching. After undergoing penance for 32 years, they both went to Prajapati and asked him to instruct them about the immortal self. Prajapati tells them that the self is that which is seen as a reflection in the eye or in water or in the mirror. Virochana was quite satisfied with the answer, and he went back to his kingdom and told the demons that they should always be well adorned, well dressed and absolutely clean, so that their self is also well adorned, well dressed and clean, and that will make them immortal. Indra, however, kept thinking and wondering, how can self be the reflection of the body? If the body is well adorned and well dressed, then the self is also well adorned and well dressed. But what if the body is blind or has a running nose or is crippled? Is the self also blind and crippled and has a running nose? Also, the body perishes. Will the self also perish with the body? Indra realized that there was something wrong. So, he decided to go back to Prajapati. And when Prajapati saw him, he asked Indra the purpose of his return. And Indra explained his doubts to Prajapati. Prajapati then told him to stay for another 32 years to become qualified for the knowledge of the self. After 32 years, Prajapati noticed Indra and gave him the instruction that what he sees in his dreams roaming freely, that is the immortal self or Brahman. Satisfied with the answer, Indra started his journey towards his kingdom. But while he was on his way, he thought to himself that it's fine that the dream self is not killed when the body is killed, nor it has a running nose when the body has it, but the dream self appears to be in pain, in fear, and even weeping. So, this cannot be the immortal self or Brahman. Again, he takes a U-turn and goes back to Prajapati and tells him about his doubts. Prajapati again asks him to stay for another 32 years. And after 32 years, Indra again asks Prajapati to instruct him about the self. And this time, Prajapati tells him that the enjoyer of deep, dreamless sleep is the immortal, fearless self, for here the organs are all withdrawn and there is complete tranquility. Satisfied, Indra begins his journey back to his kingdom. But again, on his way, he finds a defect in this instruction as well. He thinks that the self in deep sleep is absolutely nothing. It has no knowledge, no feeling, no willing. It is basically a zero. How can that be the immortal self or Brahman? So he goes back to Prajapati and shares this difficulty with him. Prajapati is now extremely happy with Indra, for he found a very good student in him. And this time he asks Indra to stay for 5 years. After 5 years, Prajapati gave his final instruction to Indra. He tells him that the body is not the self, though it is the seat of the self. The dream experiences are not the self, though they have no existence apart from the self. The self is also not the enjoyer of dreamless deep sleep. Rather, it is the unchangeable essence of the empirical self. And when one realizes this, one attains all the worlds and all the desirable things. Let us now come to the Mandukya Upanishad. This Upanishad, in a highly sophisticated and philosophical manner, brings home the same point made in the Chandogya Upanishad and establishes how the knowledge of Brahman can be attained. Brahman here is signified as consciousness, for Brahman is really so. Sat, Chit, Anand, truth, consciousness, bliss. Now, the Mandukya Upanishad analyzes the 3 states experienced by all human beings during their lifetime. They are actually called the 3 states of consciousness. The 3 states of consciousness are the wakeful state, the dream state, and the deep sleep state. The wakeful state is the state of consciousness of the external world, and it is called Vishwa. All human perceptions, ideas, reasonings, and conceptualizations about the external world are the result of this state. Of course, it is the mind and the sense organs, with the help of external factors such as light, etc., and consciousness, that one experiences the external world. Let us understand this in a more analytical manner. When the consciousness through the mind and the sense organs goes to the external world, one experiences, for example, one's own physical body, the mango tree, the river, the mountains, the sun, and so on. The consciousness in the wakeful state indicates that the external world is visible, audible, tangible, and is bound by certain laws. But unfortunately, one begins to identify himself or herself with the world and takes it to be the real, or rather the only reality. And this becomes the cause of bondage of the self, which can never be bound, as this identification is only an appearance, not a reality. Now the second, the dream state, is one in which one experiences internal objects through the light of consciousness, and it is called Tejasa. In this state, the consciousness withdraws itself from the external world and lights up only the mind and enjoys subtle imaginary objects. Interestingly, the dream objects, however real they may appear in that state, they all get falsified when one wakes up. Now, the deep sleep state. It is that in which neither the internal nor the external world exists. The sense organs, the intellect, the mind, ego, memory, they all remain non-functional. And the state is called pragya. There are no desires, no dreams, no pain, no knowledge, and no ignorance. Now, is this state the state of bliss? The Upanishad says no. But it proves one point, and that is the presence of consciousness. For how would one know whether one slept happily and did not know anything? This recollection of having a good deep sleep is possible only because of the presence of consciousness in that state. And as I just mentioned, that it is still not the state of bliss. I want to make one thing clear at this point, and that is in all these three states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, consciousness has remained as the substratum, unaffected and unperturbed. Now let us discuss the state of pure consciousness called Turiya, which one may call the fourth state. Now Turiya does not have any characteristics. Here, like deep sleep, there is no duality of the self and the world. But here, unlike deep sleep, there is positive bliss. Here all sort of plurality merges. But if one wishes to describe it, then one would severely fail in his attempt. For descriptions are possible only at the empirical level. As I just said, that the three states, wakeful, dream, and deep sleep, are only falsely superimposed on the self or the consciousness, and that the self is ever present and is the substratum of these three experiences or appearances. And when these illusory appearances are removed by means of right knowledge, the state of Turiya emerges. The revelation of the Turiya and the falsification of the three states are simultaneous and not successive in time. The Turiya is ever present. The Mandukya Upanishad makes an interesting point by introducing Om as the symbol depicting these states of consciousness. Or in other words, the self is to be identified with the syllable Om. The first three letters A-U-M are both audible and spoken letters, whereas the last letter, or rather the unspoken letter which comes after M, corresponds to the 4 states of the self. In fact, the unspoken letter is the source of the spoken 3 letters, just as Turya is the substratum of the other 3 states of life. The Upanishad prescribes meditation on these 4 letters, because when one meditates on these 4 letters, one realizes the identity of the silent source of the 3 letters with Turya. This meditation leads to the direct understanding that I am the Turya, I am the self. So, the Mandukya Upanishad says, Om indeed is the self. Thus, the Upanishad gives a method for the experiential realization of the self or Brahman. I also want to mention at this point that pranas also find a central place in the Upanishadic discussions. And prana means vital breath. Upanishads regard pranas as interconnected with the Atman. They are the essence of life. As long as the prana remains in the body remains alive. There is an interesting episode regarding the superiority of prana in the Upanishads, which you must all know. There was once a competition between prana and other vital forces such as sight, sound, mind, intellect, etc. Each one claimed the superiority of itself over the other. So finally, it was decided that each one will leave the body one by one to know which one of them was the most important in keeping the body alive. As the vital organs started to leave one after another, the body continued to remain alive. Of course, if the sight of the person leaves him, he wouldn't die. Or if the intellect leaves him, he will only go mad but not die. But when the prana left the body died. And when the prana returned, the body came back to life. And thus, the superiority of the prana or vital breath was established. Now, the Chandogya Upanishad says that during deep sleep, all the vital organs pass into prana. And that is why a person in deep sleep is totally disconnected from the world and is unaware of everything. Let us now discuss the Katha Upanishad as it what it has to say about the Supreme Self or Brahman. Now, the Upanishad, Katha Upanishad, begins with the story and dialogues of Nachiketa and Yamraj, the ruler of death. The dialogue deals with many issues like the mystery of death, the afterworld, the law of karma, and immortality of the soul. The Upanishad clearly states that the one who knows Brahman enjoys the blessings of the Brahma Gyan and becomes free from the fear of death. It also underlies the importance of a realized guru who can instruct the seekers after truth to rise above the transient world and the temptations of human life and get to that transcendent level where there is realization of the identity between Atman and Brahman. The story in the form of a dialogue goes like this. A wealthy man, Vajasravasa, performed a great sacrifice to attain the highest. The sacrifice demanded that he should distribute his possessions wholeheartedly and to the best of his ability to the men of wisdom. His son Nachiketa, who was about 15 or 16 years old, witnessed that his father was not doing his job honestly. He was, of course, distributing stuff, but only that one which he did not require for himself. He was, for example, giving away cows, but the ones which were old and diseased, and thus of no use to anybody. Nachiketa realized that the whole sacrifice would be fruitless if the promise of sacrifice was not kept. So he went to his father and said, "I am your greatest possession. To whom will you give me?" The father did not answer. So Nachiketa repeated the same question again and again and again. Now the father, in extreme anger, said, "I give you to Yamaraj, to death." Nachiketa, believing what his father said, went to the abode of death, which we call the Pretaloka. Yamaraj was not there that time, so Nachiketa waited for 3 days and 3 nights. He did not get any food to eat or anything to drink. And when Yama returned, he saw this young boy waiting outside his home. He was sad to see the state of Nachiketa. For if a guest remains unattended, without food and drink, without receiving any hospitality, then the virtues of the good fortune of the host are all lost. Yama therefore asked Nachiketa to make 3 wishes so that he can retrieve his virtues and luck. In answer to this, Nachiketa made the first wish, in which he asked for his father's peace of mind, and his wish was granted. In his second wish, Nachiketa asked Yama about that sacrifice by which humans could attain heaven. This wish too was granted by Yamaraj. Now, the third wish was regarding the mystery of death. Nachiketa wanted to know from Yama what exists after death. Yama was taken aback and he did not want to answer, for he was not sure about the mental qualification of Nachiketa. So, he tested Nachiketa by giving him various kinds of temptations. He used many techniques to dissuade him from asking the question of death, but ultimately he gave in to the steadfastness of the spiritual seeker in Nachiketa. Yama said to him that the knowledge of what happens after death is far more valuable than anything in the world. And that knowledge is the knowledge of Atman. Yama explains that the senses are higher than the objects, the mind is higher than the senses, the intellect is higher than the mind, the cosmic reason is higher than the intellect, the unmanifest is higher than the cosmic reason, and the Purusha or self is higher than the unmanifest, and there is nothing higher than that. Now, we can address some important questions regarding Brahmagyan or the knowledge of Brahman. And the first question, what may come to our mind, would be like, who can be a seeker of the knowledge of Brahman? To this, the Upanishads say that the Brahman cannot be known by him who is devoid of the strength of character, or who is not careful in his thoughts, and who has no spirit of renunciation along with his knowledge. The self which is hidden in all beings can be seen only by those men of keen vision with their sharp, one-pointed intellect. The second important question is, how can this knowledge be attained? The Upanishads recommend that the seeker must approach a teacher for the direct knowledge of Brahman. The teacher, on his part, will impart self-knowledge to his student, which will destroy his avidya or ignorance and set him free forever. The Chandogya Upanishad illustrates how a teacher liberates his student. Imagine a person who is left at an unknown place, blindfolded, has no clue about any direction, and does not know how he can get out of that place and reach back his home. And then suddenly someone appears, removes the cover from his eyes and shows him the direction. Similarly, a teacher instructs his student how he can attain knowledge in this world. Now the most important question: what is this supreme knowledge which the Upanishads talk about? The answer is, supreme knowledge is the knowledge that comes through the Mahavakya, Tat Tvam Asi, or Thou art that, which means there is no distinction between Jivatma and Paramatma. And again, I am tempted to take recourse to the Chandogya Upanishad, for it makes the teaching so vivid and clear through its stories that one wishes to go through them again and again. So, again it is a dialogue between Uddalaka and his son Shvetaketu. Here, Shvetaketu is trying to understand from his father the meaning of the Mahavakya Tat Tvam Asi, or Thou art that, meaning you are that, thou art that. Uddalaka says, just as the waters of different rivers flow down into the ocean and become one with the ocean, so that the identity of the water of the rivers is lost forever in the ocean water. Similarly, the individual self finally merges into the Supreme Self and in fact becomes one with the Supreme Self. Thou art that, Shvetaketu. Shvetaketu did not understand much and he wanted to know more. So his father asked him to bring a fruit of a banyan tree and cut it open. When Shvetaketu did so, Uddalaka said, "See how small is the fruit, but how many smaller seeds it contains. Each seed will become a banyan tree with huge branches and thousands of leaves. All these things lie embedded in this small seed. Similarly, the whole creation with all its varieties lies hidden in the Supreme Self. Thou art that, Shvetaketu." Then, pointing to a tree, Uddalaka said, "If you cut a part of it on the top or middle or at the bottom, the tree does not die. But if a branch is cut off, it dies. If a part is separated from the self, it withers and decays. It is the self which permeates the whole body of a tree, and it is the supporter, likewise, of the whole creation. It is the all-pervasive, omniscient self. Thou art that, Shvetaketu." Since Shvetaketu was still wanting to know more, Uddalaka asked him to bring a lump of salt and put it in a tub of water at night. Next morning, Uddalaka asked him to find whether the lump of salt was still in the tub of water. The son replied that it had melted in the water. Uddalaka asked him to taste a little water from the top, middle and bottom of the tub. Shvetaketu tasted it and said that every part was equally salty in taste. Uddalaka said, "As you cannot see the salt in the water, you cannot see the self in the body. It is subtler than the most subtle and pervades the whole of the universe. It is the only truth. Thou art that, O Shvetaketu." In this way, Shvetaketu grasped the supreme truth and there was nothing left to be known for him. But from all this discussion, you must not assume that the Upanishads are just about the heavy metaphysical stuff. For we do get instances where the Upanishads give instructions on ethics. To give you an example, let us take the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And the story goes like this. All the descendants of Prajapati, the gods, the men and the demons lived with him for some time as students. One day, the gods approached Prajapati and said, "Teach us, sir." In reply, Prajapati uttered one syllable, "the." Then he said, "Have you understood?" And the gods answered, "Yes, we have understood. You said to us, Damyata, be self-controlled." "Yes," agreed Prajapati, "you have understood." Then the men went to Prajapati and said, "Teach us, sir." Prajapati uttered the same syllable, "the." Then he asked the men, "Have you understood?" And the men said, "Yes, we have understood. You said to us, Datta, be charitable." "Yes," agreed Prajapati, "you have understood." And finally, it was the turn of the demons. They went to Prajapati and said, "Teach us, sir." Prajapati uttered the same syllable, "the." Then he said, "Have you understood?" And the demons said, "Yes, we have understood. You told us, Dayadvam, be compassionate." "Yes," agreed Prajapati, "you have understood." This passage from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad signifies that the single word "the" is instructive for the three layers of our personality. An individual is a blend of godliness, humanness and demonness, each having an essential vice which, if goes unchecked, will only lead one into a blind alley. The divine part in the individual qualifies one to revel in the pleasures and splendors through the senses. Without a restraint, the individual will get addicted to sensual enjoyments and become egoistic. The human part is greedy and covetous. If not checked, it makes one insensitive and selfish. The demonic part, which is cruel and aggressive, harms both the self and the other. Thus, that is, self-control, charity and compassion were taught by the Creator so that these vices in us could be sublimated and we could move towards our spiritual progress. Thus, the central message of the Upanishadic philosophy of the oneness of the Atman with the Brahman can be realized only when indulgence, greed and cruelty, which are impediments in this spiritual journey, are eradicated. So, we come to know of the importance of the great teaching Dhamma, Dan and Daya for defeating these strong urges of our personality and reaching the state of unity with the Supreme Reality. Now, I will end my lecture by quoting Swami Vivekananda, who said that the truth of the Upanishads are before you. Take them, live up to them, and the salvation of India will be at hand. Thank you so much.